Tonight, we will journey together into the echoing stone corridors and the hidden corners of a medieval castle. These mighty fortresses, built to withstand the trials of war, were also homes full of quiet routines, bustling work, and the daily lives of men, women, and children who lived within their walls. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. As you imagine the setting, picture yourself at the foot of a towering castle keep. The walls rise up in steady gray blocks of stone, weathered by centuries of rain and wind. Around the fortress, the countryside stretches away. Fields, rivers, and small villages clustered for protection in the shadow of the great stronghold. The air carries a faint scent of wood smoke from the hearths within, and if you listen closely, you might hear the muffled clatter of pots, the shuffle of feet across worn flagstones, or the distant call of a guard upon the battlements. Castles were more than mere military outposts. They were microcosms of society, a place where lords and ladies conducted affairs of power, where servants toiled in kitchens, where children played in the courtyards, and where priests whispered prayers in dim-lit chapels. In every corner, there was both austerity and comfort, strict routine and moments of leisure. In the hours ahead, we will explore 4 distinct aspects of castle life. We will begin by immersing ourselves in the reality of daily existence within these walls, considering why, despite their majesty, you might find life in a medieval castle to be less than comfortable. From there, we will step into the story of a famous siege, the endurance and hardship of Rochester Castle under attack. Next, we will uncover the mysteries of secret passages, tunnels, and stairways that wound their way through stone. Finally, we will join the Lord and his household in the Great Hall, where banquets and rituals of power gave the fortress its grandeur. This is not a story of knights clashing swords or heroic rescues. Instead, it is a quieter narrative. The steady hum of life, the echo of history in forgotten chambers, the contrast between the harshness of existence and the small comforts people carved out for themselves. So, close your eyes if you wish. Imagine the cool air of the castle walls, the steady rhythm of footsteps in long corridors, the faint flicker of torchlight on stone. Allow yourself to drift back in time, where the pace of life was slower, the walls taller, and the nights darker than we know them today. And with that, let us begin. Imagine stepping across the threshold of a medieval castle for the very first time. The heavy wooden doors close behind you, secured with thick iron hinges. At once, you notice the chill. The air is cooler than outside, the stone walls absorbing and holding dampness. No matter the season, castles rarely felt warm. Even in summer, the thick walls that defended against arrows and catapults also kept out the heat of the sun. Your breath might miss before you in winter, especially in the early morning. Fires burned in great hearths, but their warmth rarely spread far. Rooms high in the towers were drafty, with narrow slits for windows. Heavy tapestries hung along the walls were not only decorative, but also practical, meant to insulate the chambers and break the chill. Still, the sense of cold was constant, and the smell of smoke clung to everything. The daily routine inside a castle was not leisurely. At dawn, the castle stirred to life. Servants rose early to fetch water from wells or cisterns, carrying it in wooden buckets to kitchens and chambers. The rhythm of work was unrelenting. Fires needed tending, food required preparation, animals had to be cared for. Cooks bustled in kitchens that were dark, smoky, and perpetually noisy, turning spits of meat, grinding grain into flour, or stirring great pots of pottage. A thick, slow-cooked stew that fed many mouths. Life was ordered by duty. Each person had their role. Pages ran errands, squires polished armor, laundresses scrubbed linen in icy water. Even the nobility followed strict routines. A lord or lady's day was filled with managing estates, settling disputes, overseeing accounts, and tending to the endless demands of governance. Leisure existed, but it was structured. Hunting in the forests, embroidery in the chambers, prayers in the chapel. You might expect safety within the thick walls, but comfort was not guaranteed. The courtyards were noisy with the clatter of hooves, the barking of dogs, the clang of blacksmiths at their forges. Sanitation was rudimentary. Privies were little more than stone chambers with shafts leading downward, and the smell could linger unpleasantly. Water was precious, and not always clean. Illness spread easily, and the damp conditions made colds, coughs, and fevers common companions. Even eating, a central part of castle life, was far from indulgent on ordinary days. Meals were served at long trestle tables, and food was plain unless a feast was declared. Bread, cheese, ale, and stews formed the bulk of diets. Salt was a treasured preservative, spices a luxury from faraway lands. The lord's household dined with some ceremony, but the fare itself was not always lavish. For the servants, meals were simple and quick, eaten before rushing back to their duties. Yet for all the hardship, there was rhythm and predictability, which many may have found comforting. The tolling of bells marked the passing of hours and the calling to prayers. The repetition of tasks created a steady flow to each day, even as the seasons shifted outside the walls. In winter, work was slower, fires burned longer, and the castle huddled inward. In summer, gates opened more often. Fields outside bustled, and markets brought noise and color within the courtyard. If you imagine yourself spending just one day within a medieval castle, you might quickly discover that the cold, the labor, and the unyielding structure would test your endurance. Yet those who lived here were accustomed to it. They were born to the rhythm of bells, to the weight of stone walls, to the steady duties that never ceased. This was life inside the fortress, demanding, unrelenting, and always shaped by the shadow of defense. A castle was a place of safety, but also of constant work. And if you were to stay longer, you would find that its routines became as steady as the turning of the seasons. From the ordinary routines of life within castle walls, let us now shift our attention to a moment when those routines were disrupted. Castles were built for defense, and their very existence was bound to the threat of attack. Few events reveal their purpose more clearly than a siege. To step into the story of such a time is to understand not only the strength of stone, but also the endurance of those who lived within it. One of the most memorable sieges in English history took place in the year 1215 at Rochester Castle. The great stone fortress, rising beside the river Medway, stood as a symbol of power. Its tall keep, square and imposing, was among the most formidable of its kind. Yet in that year, it became the focus of conflict during the turbulent reign of King John, a monarch remembered for his strained relations with his barons, and for sealing, reluctantly, the Magna Carta. When rebellion broke out, Rochester Castle fell into the hands of baronial forces opposing the king. John could not allow such a stronghold to remain in enemy control. And so, in the autumn of 1215, he marched upon it with his army. What followed was not a swift battle, but a long and grinding siege, a test of patience, resources, and human resilience. Imagine yourself within the walls at the onset of the siege. The gates are barred, the portcullis lowered, and the drawbridge raised. Supplies have been gathered: salted meat, dried grains, casks of ale, and barrels of water. The inhabitants know that days, perhaps weeks, of confinement await them. The outer world grows distant, replaced by the constant tension of waiting. For the defenders, each day followed a rhythm shaped by vigilance. Guards walked the battlements, their eyes scanning for movement beyond the moat. Archers stood ready, their bows strung, while masons prepared stones to be hurled down upon attackers. Below, in the kitchens, cooks measured out food more carefully, knowing it must last. Fires smoldered, but smoke was kept low, lest it signal weakness. King John's forces surrounded the castle, cutting off escape and supply. They constructed siege engines, great wooden machines designed to batter walls or fling projectiles. The sound of hammers and saws echoed across the fields as the attackers prepared their assault. To the defenders inside, each thud was a reminder of the storm that was gathering beyond their gates. Days stretched into weeks. The castle's thick walls stood firm, but strain grew within. The defenders knew that no help was coming swiftly. The barons had placed great faith in Rochester, yet reinforcements were delayed. And still the king pressed his advantage. One of the most striking moments of the siege came when John ordered miners to dig beneath the castle as South Tower. Tunnels were driven into the earth, supported with timber, inching closer with each passing day. Once the miners reached the foundations, they stacked the tunnel with brushwood and pig fat, a substance that, once set aflame, burned fiercely. When the fire consumed the wooden supports, the ground gave way. With a rumble that must have shaken the air, part of the tower collapsed, its stones tumbling into ruin. Yet even then, the defenders did not surrender. They withdrew deeper into the keep, barricading themselves within the remaining chambers. Smoke, dust, and rubble filled the air, but determination lingered. The rhythm of defense continued, rationing food, guarding doors, holding fast against despair. Eventually, though, hunger gnawed at their strength. Supplies dwindled, and the promise of relief seemed distant. Accounts from the time speak of the defenders forced to eat horseflesh to survive. Though grim, this was not unusual in sieges. Starvation was often as deadly a weapon as any sword or stone. At last, after weeks of endurance, Rochester fell. The defenders, weakened and exhausted, were captured. King John had won his prize, but the siege revealed more than his power. It showed the sheer resilience of those who lived within stone walls, the ability of a castle to resist for weeks against a determined king, and the harsh realities of medieval warfare. To picture such an event is not to imagine constant noise or chaos, but rather long stretches of waiting punctuated by moments of fear, the steady tread of guards on the battlements, the faint murmur of prayers in the chapel, voices seeking comfort, the hollow pang of hunger, and outside, the slow, methodical labor of men working to bring down stone. For those inside Rochester Castle, the siege must have seemed endless, yet like all things it passed. The smoke cleared, the rubble was gathered, and the castle endured. To this day, the keep of Rochester stands in partial ruin, a reminder of that struggle. Its stones hold the memory of endurance and collapse, of the cold patience of siege, and of the lives lived within its walls. From this tale of conflict, we will in time move to something quieter, to the secrets that castles themselves concealed. But for now, hold the image of Rochester in your mind. The gray stone towers against the autumn sky, the sound of work beyond the walls, the dim interior where people clung to survival. A fortress not only of stone, but of human resolve. From the thunder of siege engines and the weight of stone collapsing at Rochester, let us move into quieter spaces, the hidden places of castles, where steps led not to open courtyards, but into shadowed corridors. Secret passages are among the most intriguing features associated with castles. To imagine them is to step into mystery. Narrow staircases hidden behind walls, tunnels burrowed beneath the earth, doors concealed within panels of wood or stone. Though not every castle held such secrets, the idea of them lingers, blending history with legend. They remind us that castles were not only fortresses of stone, but also labyrinths, full of corners, recesses, and forgotten ways. Picture yourself walking through a great hall. Its walls are hung with tapestries, and light flickers across the stone from a hearth. To most eyes, The chamber is straightforward, a space for dining, for gatherings, for ceremonies. Yet somewhere along the wall, a seam might conceal a narrow doorway. Push upon it, and the wall shifts just enough to admit a person into darkness. Beyond lies a passage that threads its way upward or downward, away from the bustle of the hall. These passages served many purposes. Some were practical, providing servants with hidden routes to carry food, fetch water, or move supplies without disturbing the Lord and his guests. Others were designed with defense in mind, escape routes leading beyond the walls, or hidden stairs allowing soldiers to emerge unexpectedly in different parts of the fortress. In times of danger, such hidden ways could mean the difference between survival and capture. One famous example is found at Chepstow Castle in Wales, where postern gates, small, concealed doors, allowed movement between the riverbank and the fortress. They were narrow and easy to overlook, but in an emergency, they offered a path of escape or a way to bring supplies unseen. In other castles, secret staircases wound up inside towers, allowing defenders to move quickly between levels without exposure to enemy fire. Yet not all passages were purely defensive. Some existed for convenience. The kitchens of a castle were often far from the great hall, separated to reduce the risk of fire. Hidden corridors allowed servants to move between them quickly, bearing platters of food and jugs of ale, unseen by the guests until they emerged at the tables. For those living within the castle, these unseen pathways were part of the daily rhythm, familiar as any courtyard or chamber. Legends add another layer of fascination. Stories abound of tunnels stretching far beyond castle walls, routes through which lords might escape into forests or across rivers. Some tales describe passages linking castles to monasteries or even to other fortresses miles away. While many of these accounts are exaggerations, their persistence reveals something about the imagination castles inspire. To the medieval mind, a castle was more than stone. It was a place of secrets, of hidden power. Imagine now the sensory experience of stepping into such a passage. The air is cooler, stiller. Stone presses close on either side, and your footsteps echo in a confined space. The smell is faintly earthy, tinged with dampness. Perhaps a small arrow slit lets in a thread of daylight, illuminating dust in the air. Or perhaps it is complete darkness, broken only by the wavering glow of a torch. Each turn carries a sense of uncertainty. Where does the stair lead, and who might be waiting at its end? Some passages had darker uses. Accounts tell of lords who used them to spy upon their guests, listening through hidden apertures in the walls. Others hint at betrayals, where a hidden way allowed enemies within the walls. The same secrecy that protected also carried risk. What was concealed could be discovered, and what was meant to guard might one day be turned against its maker. And yet, despite the tales, many passages have been lost to time. Some were bricked up, their entrances disguised when castles fell into disuse. Others crumbled or collapsed, leaving only faint traces in the stone. Archaeologists sometimes uncover these spaces, finding narrow stairs or blocked tunnels that hint at stories untold. To explore them is to touch the silence of the past, to stand in places where countless feet once hurried unseen. The fascination we feel for these passages lies not only in their function, but in what they represent. They are thresholds between the visible and the hidden, between daily life and the unknown. A castle, from the outside, appears solid and impenetrable. But within, there were doors that led into shadow, ways that defied the certainty of stone walls. As you picture yourself in such a place, consider the contrast to the open courtyards and great chambers we have already walked through. Here the world is hushed. Your hands brush against cold stone. The ceiling presses low, and the path twists away into mystery. For those who lived in castles, such passages were not always extraordinary. They were part of the architecture, tools for movement and survival. Yet for us, They carry the aura of secrets, of lives lived partly in shadow. When we leave these hidden corridors behind, we will return to light and music, to the grandeur of the great hall. There, the lord of the castle presided, and the rhythms of power and ceremony unfolded. But for now, let your mind linger in the stillness of the hidden stair, where stone walls whisper of forgotten footsteps, and where history itself seems to pause in the shadows. From the silence of hidden stairways and secret tunnels, let us step outward once more into brightness and sound. At the heart of almost every castle stood the Great Hall, the largest and most important chamber within its walls. It was here that the Lord displayed his authority, where meals were shared, where justice was administered, and where music and ritual filled the air. Imagine yourself entering such a hall. The doors, heavy and iron-banded, open to reveal a vast space of stone walls and high timber-board ceilings. Light filters in through narrow windows set high in the walls, their colored glass casting faint patterns upon the floor. The hall is dominated by a long central hearth, where flames crackle and smoke drifts slowly upward toward the rafters. Though smoke often lingers in the air, the warmth of the fire softens the chill that clings to the rest of the castle. At the far end stands the Lord's dais, raised a step above the rest of the room. Upon it sits the high table, where the Lord, his family, and honored guests take their places. Beneath this elevated position, long trestle tables stretch down the length of the hall. Here, retainers, soldiers, and servants gather to eat when feasts are held. Rank and order are visible in the very arrangement of the seats, each place a quiet signal of social standing. The meals themselves could vary greatly. On ordinary days, the fare was simple: coarse bread, hearty pottage, cheese, and ale. Yet when the occasion called for ceremony, the hall transformed into a space of display and abundance. Picture the arrival of dishes borne in by servants: roasted fowl, whole fish, or joints of meat seasoned with herbs. Platters gleam with pies, stews, and sometimes sweetmeats flavored with costly spices brought from distant lands. The scent of cinnamon, cloves, and pepper mingles with the aroma of roasting meat, filling the hall with warmth and richness. For the Lord, these feasts were not only meals, but demonstrations of wealth and authority. To provide generously for one's household and guests was to show power. The ability to offer venison from the hunt or fish drawn fresh from the river spoke of lands and rights controlled. The presence of musicians, perhaps a harpist or a group of singers, lent further dignity. Their melodies drifted upward into the rafters, weaving with the sound of conversation, the clatter of trenchers, and the laughter of those gathered. The rituals of the table were as important as the food itself. A meal might begin with a blessing, the hall falling briefly quiet as prayers were spoken. Dishes were presented with ceremony, sometimes accompanied by a flourish of trumpets or the bow of a servant. Portions were often distributed according to rank, the choicest cuts reserved for those at the high table. Yet despite this hierarchy, there was also a sense of community. Hundreds might eat together, united in the rhythm of the feast. Beyond meals, the Great Hall served many roles. It was the stage upon which the daily life of power was enacted. Here, petitions were heard, disputes settled, and judgments given. A peasant might kneel before the Lord to request aid, while knights might gather to receive orders. The walls of the hall thus absorbed not only the sounds of feasts, but also the voices of law and authority. At times, the hall echoed with celebration. Weddings, holidays, and victories brought a more joyful spirit. Minstrels recited long tales of heroes, their words carrying listeners far beyond the stone walls. Dancers moved to the beat of drums and pipes, their steps marking moments of festivity. The play of light from torches flickered across faces, lending the scene an almost dreamlike quality. Yet in the quiet hours, when the feasting was done and the guests had retired, the hall became still once more. Servants swept away the remains of food. The long trestle tables were cleared, and the embers of the hearth glowed low in the darkness. For some, the hall also served as a sleeping place. Soldiers or lower servants might bed down upon its floor, their rest watched over by the carved beams above. The Great Hall was thus both ordinary and extraordinary. It was a place of daily meals and smoky fires, but also a space where rituals of hierarchy were made visible, where music softened the hard edges of stone, and where gatherings affirmed the bonds of loyalty and service. To walk through such a hall was to step into the very heart of medieval life, where power and community met beneath a vaulted roof. Now, as we step back from this image, allow yourself to imagine the slow fading of voices, the quiet settling of the hall at night. The tapestries hang still along the walls, the fire burns low, and the stone absorbs the silence. The life of the castle continues beyond the hall, in its kitchens, towers, and hidden stairways. But here, the rhythms of authority and ceremony have come to rest for the day. In our final moments together, we will leave behind both the hardship and the grandeur of castle life. We will close with a gentle reflection, comparing the cold routines and rigid structures of the past with the comforts we enjoy today. Let the echoes of the Great Hall linger in your mind as we move, slowly and calmly, toward conclusion. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through the stone walls of a medieval castle. We have walked through courtyards, alive with labor sat quietly during a siege at Rochester, traced our hands along the cool stone of hidden stairways, and rested for a while in the warmth of the Great Hall, where feasts and music brought life to the fortress. Each part of this journey has revealed a different rhythm, a different face of the castle's existence, harsh and demanding, secretive and mysterious, ceremonious and grand. Now, let us linger a while in reflection. Castles, from a distance, appear eternal and unchanging. Their towers rise proudly against the skyline, their walls seeming to defy time itself. Yet inside, life was fragile and endlessly in motion. People rose at dawn to their duties, ate their meals according to the bell, and laid themselves to rest at night. The stone endured, but the human lives within were fleeting, each generation leaving only faint traces upon the walls. For the common servant, a castle was a place of ceaseless labor. The endless fetching of water, the grinding of grain, the mending of clothing, the sweeping of soot from hearths. For the noble household, it was a place of responsibility and display. Each day, decisions were made, disputes settled, alliances formed. The rhythms were strict, the routines unyielding. And yet, within those structures, people found moments of comfort, the warmth of a fire, the taste of fresh bread, the quiet murmur of prayer. When we pause to consider the siege of Rochester, we see that these walls were not merely homes, but strongholds designed for endurance. The stone held fast against the pounding of engines, the digging of mines, the fire set to undermine its towers. But even the strongest walls could not shield those inside from hunger, fear, and exhaustion. Castles were built for survival, but their inhabitants still faced the same vulnerabilities as all human beings. The need for food, the longing for safety, the limits of strength. The hidden passages remind us of another truth, that castles were not only open displays of power, but also places of concealment. For every grand hall that proclaimed the Lord's authority, there was a narrow stair that whispered of caution, secrecy, and the unknown. To live in such a place was to dwell between two worlds, the visible and the hidden, the celebrated and the concealed. And then, in the Great Hall, life reached its most public form. Here the castle showed its heart, not through cold stone or dark tunnels, but through ritual, music, and gathering. To eat together was to affirm loyalty. To share food and song was to strengthen bonds. Even in a place shaped by war, there was room for community, for joy, and for ceremony. As you reflect on all of this, let yourself consider the contrast with your own life today. Your home, most likely, is warm throughout the year, with walls that keep out cold and damp. Clean water flows at the turn of a tap, and light floods your rooms with a switch of the hand. Food is varied, fresh, and abundant, and silence at night is broken not by the clatter of hooves in the courtyard, but perhaps by the gentle hum of a distant street. Where the medieval castle dweller lived with constant duties, you may find moments of leisure. Where their nights were shadowed by smoke and flickering torches, yours are softened by steady light and the comfort of a bed. And where they listen for the sound of horns announcing an enemy, you may rest without fear, your walls not defenses of war, but shelters of peace. It is in such contrast that the past becomes a mirror, showing us both the resilience of those who came before and the comforts we sometimes take for granted. The cold, the routines, the ceaseless duties of castle life remind us how fortunate we are to live in warmth and security. Yet at the same time, the enduring rhythm of medieval life, the repetition of tasks, the gathering in halls, the closeness of community, also offers lessons about patience, endurance, and connection. As we leave the castle behind, let the images fade gently in your mind. The high towers retreat into the distance, their outlines softened by mist. The hidden stairways fall silent once more, their stones touched only by memory. The great hall grows still, its fire dying to embers, its long tables empty. The siege has ended, the sounds of battle fading into history. All that remains is the slow, steady presence of stone, enduring across centuries. And now, as you rest, let that same sense of endurance bring you calm. Imagine the weight of stone around you, not as confinement, but as shelter. Imagine the rhythm of the castle bell marking the hours, steady and slow, guiding you gently into sleep. Imagine the hush of the hidden corridors, the glow of the hearth in the great hall, the quiet murmur of voices long vanished. The castle, for all its coldness and strictness, was also a place where life unfolded in steady patterns, where people worked, ate, prayed, and slept, just as we do. Across time, their footsteps echo faintly toward us, reminding us of both the hardship and the beauty of lives lived long ago. And now, in your own time, you may allow yourself to rest. The past is quiet, the stone walls are distant, and the present moment is soft and secure. Take a slow breath in and a slow breath out. The journey is complete. The castle doors are closing gently behind us, and you may drift calmly and peacefully into sleep.